Alrighty then, let's go. I'm just going to read them all out rather than ad-libbing. Oh, well, that's not it. Anyway, if I were to describe how quote-unquote intelligent I am, for want of a better word, I would probably say that I'm not particularly intelligent at all, maybe just above average. I am not smart either, even less so than I am intelligent, but I am clever. Now, I'm not working with the official dictionary definitions of these words, and it may be that there are no real differences between them, and so what I have just said is nonsensical. However, my understanding of my meaning through each word remains. Whether it could make sense to any other human is another matter, and after I wrote that, I looked up each of those words' definitions, and in fact, I think smart is almost, my interpretation of smart was kind of like, well, smarty pants, in that smart to me meant someone who knows things that are that would be useful to employment and school smart and things like that. I'll say, I know you can be street smart, which is a bit different, but I always thought the meaning of smart, so maybe I was talking about smart, but for me clever just kind of means that you have intuition about things, and I suppose, and I can't be bothered to look. I'm obviously a retard, but I'll just leave it at that. And this is something I've been thinking about recently, is when you say the word cunt, you're not actually calling someone a cunt. You don't think that they're a vagina, and the word is so detached from that definition. And I realise this is what people have been saying for ages about the word retard, and also the N-word, and all sorts. And what's the other one? I think it was either Louis C.K. or I think it was Bill Burr, talking about the word fag and how it just doesn't mean anything. It's from where they grew up. It has its own meaning, and I'm kind of sympathetic to it now. I don't think I used to be, but now I'm kind of just getting it. Whenever the word retard doesn't have anything to do with someone who might have been considered retarded in a previous time. I don't think I was really around when people used that word. Well, not in that way, but I was obviously around when it just meant like I think it was Bill Burr. He says you just say it when they're being a fag. It's just when someone's being a retard, but it's not. And obviously, it's so hard to get it into someone's head that can only perceive it as meaning one thing. Anyway, I'm not going to bother explaining it. Yeah. Cunt is my go-to thing there for trying to explain it, but whatever. Again, I was thinking about potential cases that might be believed to disprove that everything is done in our own self-interest. Consider being asked whether you would be happy to sacrifice yourself in order to bring about a radical forward leap in world peace and world peace and prosperity. My immediate reaction is to say yes, and so would most people, I believe. And at first glance, this might seem to disprove my point entirely. However, it should be clear that really you are saying and believing this decision to be an accurate representation of your character because of what it says about you as a person. You were saying this, I should have said it back then, because of what it says about you as a person. Obviously, this can be done, as it was in my case, privately, and so the desire to portray yourself in a certain way might seem unnecessary, but it is a test for your own perception of you as anybody else's. In my case, I was imagining a scenario where I didn't make the conscious decision to be sacrificed, but instead a scenario where I was an unwitting innocent bystander in an attack. So what possible motivation would I have to accept this fate, given my belief that my subjective experience is ultimately the only thing that matters to me? Well, I am of course assuming that my subjective experience ceases the moment my brain ceases to function, and have no reason to believe otherwise. But part of not denigrating this subjective experience comes from me perceiving myself as someone who would be willing to sacrifice my subjective experience despite the knowledge I believe I am privy to. Well, you can try and decipher that nonsense. I've been using the word nonsense an awful lot as well. I'm not sure if I've ever talked about this before, but something I've heard on multiple occasions, specifically in a bit by Louis C.K. and once by Adam Buxton on his podcast, is the idea that people who work in customer service jobs, or any job that very few people would want really, but who do a terrible job. Oh, I didn't really finish that sentence. Anyway, They just talked about those people who do give terrible service in an arguably terrible job. They take the stance that it's in these persons' best interests to do a good job, and often claim that they chose to work there. This irritates me greatly. At least Louis acknowledges that the reason they had that job is because people like him don't want to do it, so they give it to other people. I think eventually the fact that jobs that everyone wants are in the best... eventually the fact that the jobs that everyone wants are in the shortest supply but pay the most, and the jobs that no one wants but almost everyone has to do, Jesus Christ, pay the least, will take its toll. Fucking hell, man. I wrote the bloody words here. Obviously the situation in the first world is far more desirable than the first world is in fucking hell. Obviously the situation in the first world, rather than the third world, is far more desirable than sweatshops where people kill themselves daily in despair. The problem that Louis and Adam perhaps can't relate to is that these people are working so that they don't become homeless, not because they even remotely want to. Jesus Christ. Well, the 5-HTP made me feel incredibly irritable and uncomfortable in my skin. And this morning my eyes had the same glazed look they had after 2 days on citalopram. And I started having the exact same thoughts that make suicide seem like the most logical option ever. However, this morning was also the day I was to start on tyrosine again, and I was greatly worried that it had all been a placebo the first time round. Fuck, I didn't write that bit, that's why I found that. The first time round, and wishful thinking. And it may still be, because for the first 6 hours or so after taking it, I felt exactly the same way, and was back to the severely suicidal me I hadn't been for a long while. However, in an instant, I decided I was seemingly addicted to YouTube, and that was the source of my depression all along, and that may well be true also. But after some consideration, it doesn't seem to fit the objective data. I think the tyrosine just kicked in. At least that's what I believe has happened. The desire to not be addicted to YouTube and my laptop I believe to be a result of the tyrosine probably. And most noticeably, my eyes are doing the familiar big pupil thing, and every thought isn't met with the most cynical and pessimistic counter-thought. But it was really strange, because I felt like I'd gone right. I hadn't made any progress. I'd gone straight back to pure old depressed me. I thought I'd basically decided, I must be bipolar, and that I'd been experiencing an upturn around, and it just happened to coincide with when I started taking tyrosine before, and it was also magnified by a slight placebo effect because I took the tyrosine and there was no change. And I seem to remember that the change was immediate last time, but obviously it wasn't, and I don't think I did actually think that last time, now that I think about it. But anyway, yeah, and then I think it was more like 7 hours after, all of a sudden, I was on top of the world. So yeah, I'm not. I really think there is a possibility that there's a placebo to it. I tried to come up with a few theories based on it, but yeah, it seems to work today. So that was yesterday that I started taking tyrosine again. Had an amazing day. All kind of things happened. I was just feeling generally amazing. It's like the YouTube thing happened, so I was having that moment again where I kind of get this feeling like, why am I get bored. I can't even watch YouTube videos because it just angers me so much, and everything seems so. I don't like saying everything seems so pointless, because that doesn't seem to capture the way it feels at all. But I guess that kind of does capture it a little bit if you think about it in the right way. Everything seems pointless, I guess, and it's just more the fact that. The thought that always comes up is I have to get a job to earn money, but then the only reason you have to earn money is so that you can afford to live, but then I don't enjoy living. There's nothing I do in life when I feel like that. There's nothing I enjoy, so there's no point to doing the things, because there's no reward at any point, and the only thing you do anything is for rewards. So yeah, today I'm trying. So I did. What I actually did yesterday was the B complex with tyrosine, because the reason I'm doing B complex is to try and aid the dopamine cycle, because vitamin B6 is essential in that. And today I'm trying with phenylalanine. So, because last time I was doing tyrosine, maybe I could just be wrong, but I was taking it once a day, and that's started to have some kind of effect on me, I think. But it's so subjective that it's impossible to really know. I'm not actually doing any experiments. So what I'm trying for just today is doing phenylalanine and beta complex, and then alternating tyrosine one day, beta complex every day, beta complex pretty much. I don't know why I do, but I can't bother. Phenylalanine the next day, and then swap back and forth. Okay, something that I think was critical to my success. Oh yes, so the job thing. I really don't think I'm going to get it, because you need to be pharma qualified. But there was a job. I applied for one, which is a research project into combining or utilising the loci system, memory palaces, and incorporating them into virtual reality, which I thought was pretty cool. And obviously I thought I had a bit of a insight into it, given the fact that I used it to get a degree after studying only for 2 weeks. So yeah, pretty interesting. Something that I think was critical to my success with the loci system, using Call of Duty maps, was the immersive realism enabled by the graphics of the game and the intricate detail of the environment and the objects embedded in it. This is something that current VR technology seems to lack for the most part. However, what VR offers is the opportunity to interact with the environment and not rely on the user to generate the entire landscape in their mind from the get-go. Live editing can be done that physically records the information. One flaw of the system I was using, that if something gets forgotten, goes fuzzy, or gets misremembered, especially if it gets unknowingly forgotten, it can be impossible to remember it or how to decipher it. Anyway, I didn't really say what I wanted to say in that one. Who cares? Okay, so this is my running theory based on my very, very, very crude experiments. I believe that my issue lies in the production/extraction of tyrosine from food sources. Or anything from, Now, whether this is a problem arising from a poorly developed microbiome or a more fundamental issue with the enzymes responsible for converting phenylalanine, I don't know. Also, I am unsure whether this could be linked to bipolar disorder and whether my mother has a similar affliction. Maybe, big maybe, some forms of bipolar are caused by your body being inefficient in its dopamine production and usage. Perhaps depressed episodes are caused by insufficient supply of tyrosine and thus dopamine, or a fault anywhere along the production cycle, and the body begins to slowly stockpile its dopamine reserves, which can take a very long time. Then, when a certain level is met, it begins to use the dopamine no less liberally than if it had a fully functional dopamine production system, which causes a manic episode. And the reason this is experienced as mania and not just normal levels of happiness is because during the depressed period, the neurons adapt to incredibly low levels of dopamine and thus express much higher dopamine receptor quantities to try to counter the scarcity of dopamine. And this euphoria itself causes even greater dopamine release in a positive feedback loop. Or maybe the decades of research into bipolar have a better grasp of the real causes, and it's more likely that there are problems with the downstream signaling cascades. But maybe I'm the one who's solved it by myself. Another possibility I was considering was whether there's a problem with the recycling of dopamine, or norepinephrine, or whatever. Because norepinephrine is just a product further down the dopamine cycle. So anyway, and maybe one of the reasons geniuses like Tesla are able to function at such a high capacity for so long is because they don't lose any dopamine/norepinephrine/phenylethylamine over time. So that's the reason I want the benefits of PEA, phenylethylamine. So that's why because I would otherwise probably just be doing tyrosine one day and then taking an off day, but I'd quite like to put the phenylalanine in there one day as well, just to try and get some PEA going. I don't know. Another thing I've noticed with 5-HTP was that I was sleepier and slept longer in the morning, whilst tyrosine makes me wake up much earlier and feel less tired. Tesla always slept for very short periods. ... Also, my dreams seem no less crazy but more vivid, and yet more recognisable as dreams when I'm in them. I feel more inclined to have a lucid dream. Not that I did have a lucid dream, but there's a kind of different feeling that feels more. I feel like I've got more cognitive power in the dream. Obviously, Tesla also had some variant of OCD, which, judging from a typical brain scan, involves increased neuronal activity throughout most of the brain. Presumably, such activity would be dependent on a sufficient supply of dopamine, possibly norepinephrine. I don't know. So yeah, I think I've sussed genius. I've absolutely solved it. They've got excellent. Well, obviously, geniuses have got not perfectly, but a very efficient brain and very well functioning brain. And I imagine dopamine plays a critical. I think dopamine is probably the most critical point in that. But probably it's just all of their systems are functioning properly, whereas most people have some kind of just a slight variation. You can, maybe you can't convert, you convert too much dopamine into norepinephrine or not enough, or you can't extract tyrosine from your food, or your dopamine gets degraded too rapidly, and maybe it doesn't get recycled properly, and it just gets degraded and then lost to, I don't know how it gets lost, fucking lymphatic system. I don't know. I'm not sure if I ever clarified this really, but the reason I believe my theory that the subjective experience is all that matters counters nihilism, or at least makes the typical assumptions from nihilism invalid, is that the basis for nihilism is that there is no ultimate purpose or meaning to anything. However, once you realise that even if there were an ultimate purpose, that purpose would only matter in so much as it affected your subjective experience. Jesus, try and decode that. Jesus Christ. If there was a God, and it was your purpose to please that God, however the God saw fit, it would only influence your behaviour to the degree that you allowed it. You would again be acting in your own self-interest. It would just so happen that your desire was to serve the God. If the God told you to build a torturing device that would torture humanity for all of time, then your morality, one would hope, would prevent you from following these orders. However, even if you were to go through with it, you would only be doing so because of the effect following God's orders would have on your subjective experience. So, I don't think I really covered that at all well. But basically, the idea that because there's no God, all of a sudden life's not worth living doesn't really work. God, how am I going to say this? God help me. Once you accept that everything is done in your self-interest, really, because I really can't think. I know this is probably going to be not to compare myself to Plato, but Plato's old humans are just featherless bipeds, and then what's his name? I've forgotten the guy's name, but the guy who everyone likes. What's his name? Anyway, the homeless guy who just lived on the street, said a load of funny things. Came in with a plucked chicken, said, "Behold this man," or something like that. But anyway, now I've really lost my way. Once you realise, okay, no, look, what I was actually going to say was, I struggle to think of any scenario in which someone does something not in their self-interest, that they aren't actually doing with the intent of doing it in their self-interest, whether they believe they're doing it in their self-interest. They ultimately, it's really hard to, it gets quite complicated. So charitable acts you're doing because it makes you feel good. What's another example someone might try to give? Yeah, the sacrificing thing you're doing because it makes you feel good to consider yourself a martyr, I guess. It's all done because of how everything is done because you believe it'll make you feel a certain way. What about masochists? Again, they like being masochists. That's the whole point. Obviously, if someone who wasn't a masochist if someone who didn't said, "Oh, I'm not a masochist, but look, I want to get hurt," well, then they would that would make them a masochist because they want to. Or sometimes people can do things just to try and prove. So someone might do something that they might kill themselves to try and prove me wrong, but really they'd be doing that because they wanted to prove me wrong, and the feeling they'd be seeking would be one of having made me wrong. Anyway, man, I can't bother to go into it all that much. But yeah, nihilism doesn't work. Well, sorry, nihilism is true in that there is no purpose, but there is no divine purpose or anything like that. But no greater purpose to the universe, I don't think. Well, there's not one that we can know of. But you can have your own personal purpose, which is what I've talked about before. And whatever. I'm done. I'm done with that. Bye now.